Perspectives can be different and still be accurate. To illustrate this point, I want to begin my talk today on...
Say, a chicken thinks with its...
And Molly took exception with this and said, well, that can't be. And we said, sure, yeah, she's 95. I said, you're 6, I'm 35, my dad's in his 70s, and that would make sense that his mother would be in her 90s. And Molly's face kind of wrinkled there a minute, and she said, wow, if she's 90 or 95, she must really be tall. And we laughed at this, but right away I thought that Molly's perspective was right, her logic was right, because in her limited world, people who get older get taller. But as we know as we become adults, that you quit growing at a certain point in your life. But again, from her frame of reference, with her logic, limited logical foundations, this is the conclusion she came to. So in this case, perspectives can be different, but still be accurate based on the logic that you're using. Similarly, humanities perspectives can differ, but still be accurate, as long as you can logically substantiate your perspective. In my tape today, I will not be explaining the entire book of the Aeneid. What I will do is explain and substantiate my perspective. I want to start with a handout that is available with the tape, and the handout summarizes the 4 transparencies that I'll be using today. And on these transparencies, obviously, are printed materials that you can follow along with the handout or on the presentation as well. The main ideas for the presentation are in the handout, and you should be able to get by jotting down some notes on an additional sheet of paper. But keep in mind that everything I'll talk about will come back to the handout. The handout should be used as a good base for quiz questions. So in your preparation for quizzes, you should refer to the handout and information you would write down based on the handout. The first view graph gives an outline of my presentation today. And as you can see, I'll be talking about Arete and Virtus, the relationship among Virgil, the Aeneid, and Roman society, and connections between the Aeneid and present-day society. You should be finding by now that progressing through the humanities books is a building process. And to understand Aeneas, you almost have to understand Achilles in the Iliad, in that this is a building process, and that you first come to understand the Iliad and the character Achilles, and then based on that you can compare and contrast with Aeneas in the Aeneid. We now move on to looking at Arete and Virtus. Point 1 on the overview discusses Arete and personal excellence. The Greek character Achilles exemplifies Arete. Achilles manifests Arete through heroic valor and prowess in battle. Here the emphasis is on the individual. And a position I want to take and substantiate is that I'm going to relate the individual emphasis, or emphasis on the individual, and relate this to the capitalist model we have in the United States. Achilles was motivated to achieve through self-development. Similarly, in the United States, you can do what you want and be what you want based on the limitations of your abilities. So in the United States, you may have learned as a child that you can become president, you can be a banker, you can be a professor, you can be a lawyer, you can be a plumber, you can be a carpenter, based on the limitations of your abilities. But here with Arete in the Iliad and with life in the United States, The emphasis is on the individual's ability to excel. Now, in point 2 on the overview, I talk about Virtus. And Virtus emphasizes devotion to responsibility and duty, being a good citizen. The Roman character Aeneas exemplifies Virtus, in that Aeneas has strength and self-discipline, seriousness of purpose, and most importantly, a tremendous sense of duty. Okay, and this tremendous sense of duty leads to his dedication to a better Rome, or to society overall. Here, the emphasis is on society rather than on the individual. So with the emphasis on society, this relates, in my view, to a socialist model, in theory anyway. Now, socialist countries have had trouble working towards this goal of having everybody work towards a better society. But this, in theory, ideally, is what their goal is. Back to Aeneas. He is motivated to achieve by serving Rome. Similarly, in China and in Soviet Union, two of the major socialist powers in the world today, their goals are frequently expressed in ways for the individual to excel as far as serving the people and serving the masses. Okay, so with Virtus, the emphasis is on society. With Arete, the emphasis is on the individual. I now want to talk a bit about the relationship among Virgil, the Aeneid, and Roman society. The first point I want to address is that the Aeneid by Virgil is an epic about the glorification of Rome and the destiny of the Roman people. Okay, this again is a key point, that the Aeneid by Virgil is an epic about the glorification of Rome and the destiny of the Roman people. In point 2, I say that Aeneas is an archetypal Roman, in that he embodies Roman qualities, the sense of duty to Roman society. He is, for the most part, the ideal Roman. I think it may be helpful to give some examples of archetypes in popular culture, because we must understand Aeneas as an archetype and what an archetype is before we can fully appreciate the meaning of the Aeneid and why it was written and the effect it had on Roman citizens. So I want to talk about this idea of archetype for a while. Go through some examples. The character Crocodile Dundee, if you've seen any of those films that have the character Crocodile Dundee played by Paul Hogan, this exemplifies the use of an archetype for Australia, in that Paul Hogan, in his role as Crocodile Dundee, is an archetype of Australian culture. He's strong, that is, he was a construction worker in Sydney before he became famous. He is chivalrous, in that he's somewhat of a bold and brusque gentleman. He has a robust sense of humor. He likes to drink beer, but he holds it well. He doesn't get inebriated. He's in this role, he's also a spokesperson for a famous beer in Australia called Foster Lager, which I believe we import here in the United States. So Crocodile Dundee, or Paul Hogan, to me is an archetype of Australian culture. Moving on, we can look at archetypes for time periods, not just cultures. In the television show The Wonder Years, it's on ABC, there's a main character named Kevin Arnold, who's portrayed by Fred Savage. And he is the archetype of 1960s youth, that is, teenagers, not youth as in people that were college students at that time, but people who were younger children. And I point to this, I'm amused with the television show because the main character, Kevin Arnold, is 13 in 1968, and I was 13 in 1968. So as I watch this show, I appreciate it because the producers of the show have captured the archetypal kid for that period. All right, in that the experiences that he encounters in the television show are the experiences that many people in my age group can relate to, that we experience. Thus, he's an ideal archetype for that period. Now, as we look at the 1980s, I was trying to think of an archetype for the decade we just left, and there's probably a number we could point to, but one that's kind of close, I think, is a character named Max Headroom. And if you remember Max Headroom, you'll know he's not a real person, but he's a computerized techno person. Kind of superficial, uses cheap humor, not much depth there. All right, but I point to him because our society during the 1980s went through a computerization. So to me, he's an archetype of at least that computerization within our society. I want to talk a little bit here within this idea of an archetype about who might be an archetypal student from Ohio Dominican. And if I had to pick one, it would be somebody who graduated last year. Her name is Kelly Green. She was friendly, involved, a good student. As I understand now, she's continued her search for truth that we emphasize here at Ohio Dominican in Japan. As I understand it, she's studying over in Japan or perhaps teaching. At Ohio Dominican College, do we have an archetypal faculty member, somebody we can point to and say that they best represent who we are and what we're about? The example I submit to you, if you know her, and even if you don't know her, is Sister Mary McElroy, who is a reference librarian. And among other duties as reference librarian, she teaches in the English department and teaches in the Humanities program as well. But I find her to be patient, dedicated, friendly. There's a spiritual side there. The search for truth is evident. And the kind of person that if she doesn't know an answer, she'll look right at you and say, I don't know, but let's find out. Okay, and again, I think this expresses the intellectual curiosity that all of us on the faculty should have. More specifically, if I had to point to a humanities faculty member who is the archetypal humanities faculty member, it would be Dr. Quentin Colgan. To me, he's the humanities humanities tutor's tutor. In that when I have a question, I'm a humanities tutor, but when I have a question, oftentimes I go to Quentin, and he's always been able to answer questions for me. I found him to be patient and have a genuine concern with my understanding. Moving on. As an archetypal Roman, Aeneas cannot be judged by human standards. So I want to leave this idea of archetype now and talk a little bit more about Aeneas. First of all, again, he cannot be judged by human standards. His primary objective in life was the promotion of Rome. Any other concerns, such as the love for Dido, are secondary. So he can't be judged as a typical human being. And we have other examples of this in our society that I want to point to, because you need to understand not only Aeneas as an archetype, you need to understand Aeneas as somebody who cannot be judged by typical human standards we might apply to ourselves. And as I look in popular culture, I look at television shows from time to time, and there's a television show, Star Trek, and the character Spock. And I think he manifests this trait in that he can't be gauged by human standards, in that he's almost void of emotion, and he seems to be dedicated to this mission first, as Aeneas is dedicated to a mission. Superman, the character Superman, is dedicated to justice. Any feelings about Lois Lane are secondary. Oliver North, he was recently interviewed on Nightline with Ted Koppel, and his dedication to stopping communism is very strong. All right, seems to be his primary objective in life. I'm in the Air Force Reserve, and from time to time I meet people who have this similar trait in them, that they seem to live and sleep and eat towards the stopping the growth of communism. It makes you wonder what they might be like on a typical day with a picnic with their family or something, and that you want to see a human side to them. In the television show Family Ties, there's the character Alex Keaton, and with him, money is number one. Everything else is interpreted behind that. Now, a very human contrast to all of this, and somebody I can point to and say, yes, that they can be measured by human standards, is General Norman Schwarzkopf from the Gulf War. And in interviews with him, it becomes apparent that he is driven by God, family, and country. These all seem to be equal concerns with him. And when he was interviewed about the Gulf War development by Barbara Walters, he even became emotional at just the mention of his family, which tells you that he's very human and his family is very important to him. Part 3 on the overview, I start to differentiate between a literary epic and an oral epic in point 4. But with the Aeneid, this is a literary epic. I want to clarify that the literary epic provides a serious, philosophical, or patriotic message. Keep in mind that with a literary epic, the ideological content is more important than the human story. Now, if I can point to a popular culture event or film that relates closely to this idea of a literary epic, it would be Boys in the Hood, in that was a controversial film because of its ideological content rather than just the human story. Okay, in that it has a powerful ideological message about the African American community in the United States. So, keep that in mind about literary epic. It provides a serious, philosophical, or patriotic message. Now, in point 4, I comment here on the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. These both are examples of an oral epic, in that an oral epic provides a diversion and entertainment. Okay, so this is a good deal different than a literary epic. Again, it provides a diversion and entertainment. Now, if I'm pointing at Boys in the Hood as a literary epic, an example of an oral epic would be something like The Simpsons. Okay, because the television show The Simpsons, Bart Simpson, these characters, has light entertainment, but there's rarely what I would call a deep philosophical message. It's usually just for diversion or entertainment. Now, before I move on to the next handout, or the next view graph on the handout, I want to point out something that I don't note on this view graph, but you should make note of it. And that is that the Roman government supported Virgil's efforts in writing the Aeneid. They wanted him to write the book for them. 3 years before he began work on the Aeneid, he had written a book called Georgics. And Georgics is translated to mean on agriculture. And this book praised rural life, that is the agricultural lifestyle, agricultural work. And the government liked this because they were promoting the small farmer. They wanted people to look up to the small farmer and become small farmers themselves. It would be like today if I was to write a book with an anti-drug message, and the government might say, yes, we're trying to stop the use of drugs. And so if I wrote a book that became a movie, better yet, about an anti-drug campaign, then they might really like that, and they might ask me to write another book. This is what happened with Virgil, in that he wrote this book in 30 BC, and then 3 years later, in 27 BC, he began work on the Aeneid. Now, the government wanted a national poem for Rome that described, again, their glorious beginning. Just as Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were significant to the Greeks, Virgil's Aeneid was to be significant to the Romans. In this next view graph, I want to look at connections between the Aeneid and present-day society. Again, connections between the Aeneid and present-day society. A main goal in the Humanities program, as I understand it, is for you to be able to make connections between humanities readings and contemporary society. One of the reasons we teach humanities is so you will be able to interpret the present in context of our historical development. This leads to an enlightened perspective, and an enlightened perspective is a hallmark of an educated person. Point 1 on this view graph emphasizes recognition of arete and virtus in contemporary society. Arete, as you'll remember, focuses on personal excellence. Achilles had this personal excellence in his heroic valor and prowess in battle. But keep in mind, his interests are primary. Now I want to take this a little bit further like I did before and say I think arete and this emphasis on personal excellence relates to capitalism, the approach we have in the United States, which again we have a capitalist system. In that in capitalism, individual incentives lead the individual to excel. Some modern examples of this. Somebody like Pete Rose, minus the gambling charge. Does Pete Rose have prowess? Sure he has prowess. He broke Ty Cobb's record for hits. Is he a fierce competitor? Yep, he's a fierce competitor. Those head-first dives into second base, that idea of Charlie Hustle. Even his betting shows how fierce a competitor he is. Not that it's positive, obviously. But even the conservative radio talk show commentator Paul Harvey said one day when Pete Rose was being prosecuted, he said, you know, when you look at Pete Rose's record, it seems like all managers should have to bet. And that what he was saying was that Pete Rose may have been a bettor, but boy, he sure did have an impressive one-loss record. And I think Pete Rose may have a shot at the Hall of Fame. It may be a while before we find out on this, but he may have a shot at the Hall of Fame because even though he was guilty of betting, there are so many things that are positive about his background, especially in the American system of things that we value. Now, what did Pete Rose get out of this? And aside from fame and glory and the pleasure of the sport, he gets a big salary. And you may remember that when Cincinnati did not meet his salary requirements, he left Cincinnati and went and played for the Philadelphia Phillies for 1 year, and then came back to Cincinnati when they were willing to meet his salary demands. So when we get into the wonderful world of money and the emphasis on money, there's a number of people we can point to and say that they have it all. Somebody like Donald Trump has it all once more. We kind of have a love-hate relationship, I think, with Donald Trump, but we're definitely intrigued. As far as to underscore this statement that I think we're intrigued with him, the New York Daily News, the day he and Ivana Trump, Donald and Ivana Trump, announced they were splitting up, getting a divorce, that was the cover story, the main story. Down in the bottom of that front page, there was just a little blurb that Nelson Mandela had been released that day in South Africa, which I would think would have been the cover story, and that Donald and Ivana would have been on page 5. But again, that was the major story because it sells papers. Ted Turner's another one. Again, a mega star in the American system. Michael Jordan has definitely captured the American dream. He has tennis shoes, the Air Jordan tennis shoes that are named after him. He was a host on Saturday Night Live. I'm kind of looking at criteria that we can check off. He was in the Gatorade commercial, the I Want to Be Like Mike Gatorade commercial. Back, as we go through here, you know, these are people I think we can clearly point to that manifest this idea of personal excellence or arete. Even somebody, again, like General Norman Schwarzkopf is difficult to categorize this way because his success, he almost seems to defer to God, country, and family for his greatness. But he still gets a lot of money for his book, his endorsements, and he should. I don't take that away from him. In one of his interviews, I think with David Frost, he said, hey, you know, I've got expenses. I got to put some kids through college too. So, you know, he's reaping rewards here. And again, I have no problem with that. Moving on here to Virtus, recognizing Virtus in contemporary society. I want to start off by acknowledging again that Virtus focuses on devotion to society, being a good citizen. Now, Aeneas had this Virtus quality in that he had self-discipline and sense of duty. Society needs were primary to him. Now, I want to correlate this with socialism, because in socialism, opportunity to serve society is, or should be, the incentive. Again, it's ideally but rarely achieved. Now, I have an example of this from a socialist country, and this socialist country is China. Those of you that know me know that I have visited China a number of times. I taught there back in 1987, visited again in 1988, and returned for brief guest professorship in 1991. And something that caught my eye when I was there on a couple of these visits, especially during 1991, is emphasis on this fellow. His name is Lei Feng. And the sign reads, that is the characters next to Lei Feng's picture, reads, "Learn from Comrade Lei Feng." And this picture is from in front of a research institute. It would be like walking into the gates of Ohio Dominican College and having a billboard out there saying, "Learn from Lei Feng," or "Learn from Jim Schnell," or "Learn from whoever." Okay, and what this guy is he is a government-subsidized hero. We don't have government-subsidized heroes in the United States, so this is a little foreign to you, perhaps. But he is a government-subsidized hero, someone who is an archetypal Chinese citizen. They promote him and his life as being very positive and a role model that other Chinese should live their lives after. There are movies about Lei Feng, there are newspaper articles, songs about Lei Feng that children sing, posters, signs, and billboards about Lei Feng. You'll see reference to him frequently. And they even have what we call Lei Feng season in China, where, and this happened when I was there in 1991, is you'll just see Lei Feng all over the place. In newspaper articles, in fact, there was a People's Daily article or front page story that had 3 Lei Feng stories there. So they are very redundant with the message about Lei Feng. This particular view graph I'm sharing with you was from, this is about 3 blocks away from Beijing University, which Beijing University is where the protests in 1989 began. So you'll see this emphasis even on a liberal area, a Chinese version of a liberal area like Beijing University. But he's known because he served the people with heart and soul. He was a soldier in the People's Liberation Army. He's now dead. But he was dedicated to China. A phrase that's attributed to him is that, "I am a rust-free gear in Chinese society." He gave his pay and possessions to the poor. In films about him, the characters that play him, there's little things you notice, that he doesn't even drink soda pop, because soda pop, a Coke, is representative of the West, what we might call, or they would call, the decadent West. And rather than drink soda pop, he'll drink water, thanks. Okay? So anything representative of the West, he'll stay away from. And in our system, somebody who is going to be a government-subsidized hero, you'd think they would have a kind of a glorious death, you know, something that was somewhat majestic or very much a tragedy. All right? But over there, how he died was a telephone pole fell on him. He was a worker, out working. He was a soldier, but the soldiers also do typical work projects. And a telephone pole fell on him, which is symbolic of a typical, just a worker's death. Okay, a blue-collar status. But yet they hold up this person as being a great man, great person that they should all strive to be like. The government points to him as an example for others to follow, just as the Roman government was pointing towards Aeneas for the Romans to follow. The next point I ask on the view graph is, does the United States have an Aeneas? Do we have somebody who's an Aeneas? And I've thought about this for a while, and we don't have anybody that the government, I would say, holds up as strongly as the Chinese do with Lei Feng. But what they do in our society, what we do is, I think we have characters that evolve over time. Okay? And when I was thinking about the United States and who might be our Aeneas, I started considering our 215-year history and looking at what do we represent that is positive. And the 3 things I came up that are positive is that we represent freedom of expression and religion. I'm just going back to the view graph I had up before. But freedom of expression and religion, achievement based on initiative and ability, and equal opportunity for all. So this to me is what we represent that is positive in the United States. Now based on these 3 criteria, I want to take a minute here and think about who in our history, past or present, best manifests these qualities. And after thinking about it for a while, I started looking at, well, what's important to us in America? And I thought, well, money's important to us. So I looked a little closer and I thought, whose faces are on our money? You know, the symbol of what's so important to us. And if you look at the money we exchange with daily, you'll see presidents for the most part. There is Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, who's not a president. But for the most part, you'll see Washington, Lincoln, Jackson, Grant, Kennedy, and others. Holidays, what days do we take off? You'll see Washington, Lincoln, King, Jesus. All right. Other things. Let's look at our national monuments. We have the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, Mount Rushmore, among others. So just taking this sample, and we could even look at others, I was trying to come up with, again, somebody who would be an American archetype for Aeneas, archetypal American citizen, I should say. And my winner, if I had to announce one, it would be Abraham Lincoln, in that he doesn't hit all three criteria straight on, but 2 out of 3 he's pretty strong on. First of all, equal opportunity for all. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Achievement based on initiative and ability. I mean, his life story is known for this. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. You know, the rail splitter, born in a log cabin, phrases like Honest Abe. You'll see these mythical qualities of humble beginnings, honesty, hard work. And these are mythical qualities that we still admire today. And we see these in our politicians from time to time. Jimmy Carter went from being a peanut farmer to the White House. Michael Dukakis was the grandson of immigrants. They worked their way up through the system. Again, humble beginnings, honesty, hard work. Now, President Bush, when he nominated Dan Quayle as his running mate, a number of media representatives, Dan Rather for one, portrayed or tried to portray Dan Quayle as kind of a rich kid who was out of touch with the American people because of his wealth. He'd grown up in wealth. And Dan Rather referred to him as, not Dan Quayle, but he called him J. Danforth Quayle, which is a very formal pronouncement of Dan Quayle's name. I have not seen it before or since. But by calling him this, he was trying to show that he was a rich kid born in a wealthy setting, raised in a wealthy setting, and would be out of touch with most of Americans. Now, I think we, overall, will try to claim some of these mythical qualities I was mentioning earlier, whenever possible. Students who pay their way through college may not brag about it, but if the topic comes up, they'll mention that they put themselves through college. If I ran for office, political office out in Gahanna, I might just say, lean back and kind of play a country boy image and say, well, I'm just a Gahanna boy. I might mention that I've been financially on my own since I was, after my first year in college for the most part. Promote what I would call a local boy makes good image, and that plays well in America, but it wouldn't play necessarily very well in other cultures. So if we look at an archetypal American, we can start to look at other cultures. And I want to point another example here outside of the United States, and this would be in Russia. The Russian leader Boris Yeltsin, in that to me he exemplifies their goals in the socialist to capitalist transition. If you look at just what little we know about Yeltsin's life, that is the common person, which you'd see in the media, he's almost a caricature that you would want to create for this socialist to capitalist transition. He grew up in an agricultural commune. As a child, he shared a sleeping mat on the floor of that communal hut with 4 siblings and a goat. Okay, so this is very primitive. Kind of had a rough childhood. He lost a finger and a thumb by when he accidentally picked up a booby trap, something that was left from World War II. It was some type of grenade. After he had graduated from college, he traveled through Russia as a hobo, unemployed, lived among the unemployed and the destitute, and he just wanted to see how the common person lived in Russia. So he's very much of a grassroots type of person. After these travels, he then began his dramatic climb into the political infrastructure of the Soviet Union. Even though he's gone far in the political infrastructure, he's still very much of a tough guy. Not what I'd call a smooth politician, but he has some rough edges there. When he came to the United States, his visit was marred by some of his drinking, in that they said he was suffering from jet lag, but then after a while it was kind of let out that he'd been drinking a lot of vodka and that he didn't hold his liquor so well. Now, during this time, the White House wouldn't even receive him. He couldn't even get in for a state visit. So that shows you where he was ranked. This is just within the past few years. But obviously now, I mean, he's on par and perhaps even ahead of Mikhail Gorbachev. Dramatic pictures of him during the coup, of staring down the coup forces standing on top of that tank in Moscow. Had he been killed, I think he would be a great martyr for that movement. In point 3, in my closing point, I'm going to be looking at the writing of the Aeneid and how it exemplifies a timeless concern and search for roots. You'll remember that the Roman government encouraged Virgil to write a national epic describing the glorious beginnings of Rome. Truth was not important in this venture, okay? Aeneid is fictional, but it gives them roots, a glorious point of reference that they can point to and say, yes, we're out of that tradition. Today, similarly, in American culture and other cultures as well, we trace our roots as a means of understanding ourselves through our family history. My brother and I, for example, have traced our family roots on both sides of the family, and on our mother's side, it's quite easy that we go back to Gehenna, I believe back into the time of the Indians even. Okay, but on my father's side, it's a little bit more difficult, and we traced it back to Germany back in 1985. That my grandfather's grandfather traveled to the United States from Germany. His name was George Michael Schnell, and when we arrived in the small town of Kubach, West Germany, and we were able to convey to them who we were. They were very nice, hospitable, put us up for the night, fed us, all this sort of thing. But they made it a point within about 5 to 10 minutes of first meeting them that our ancestor had been disinherited for a number of reasons. So this kind of hurt our mythical picture of him, and that we assumed he must be an Aeneid, that is kind of a great guy, because we like to think we're good guys. My dad's a good guy, my grandfather was a good guy, and we figured it must be something that goes back to the beginning. But apparently George Michael Schnell had some days that were better than others. Anyway, again, we were looking for an Aeneid here, and when we saw the facts, it kind of hurt our mythical picture. Didn't devastate it, though. Other areas where we see this search for roots being important. If you look at the Middle East, specifically Israel, or even more specifically Jerusalem, and then even more specifically Old Jerusalem, you'll see the Jews and the Arabs fighting over the area we call Old Jerusalem, in that the roots of both are located in this small area of Old Jerusalem. Not only does each of these want control of the area, but they want the other one out of the area entirely. I'm from out in Gehenna, and one of my first jobs was working as a busboy in a local grill, called the Gehenna Grill. And even at that time, this was probably 23, 24 years ago, I can remember people lamenting the growth of the town, and that it was changing who we are and how we perceive ourselves. You would hear people comment that we didn't lock our doors back then, or you knew everybody, it was safer. Okay, and what they're doing there is they're looking at the roots of the town, and there's a concern for roots that relates back to the Romans' concern in their creation of Aeneas and the Aeneid. Further out on Route 62 past Gehenna is a town, New Albany, and residents of New Albany that have been there a number of years are starting to have lamenting the growth of their town, in that it's an organization called the New Albany Company, what's commonly referred to as Wexley, a huge community of huge homes. It's changed the economic factors out there as far as the economic influx, a lot of money coming in there, huge houses, nice golf courses, etc. It's changing who they are, and they're complaining that it's exploiting their country past. They had a problem here about a month ago where they didn't have enough drinking water. They were running low on drinking water, but they had enough water for watering the local golf course that had just been built. So here we have this conflict of past with present, that is past drinking water with present, building a golf course and watering a golf course, but not, having water for people to drink. Ohio Dominican College, we can say go beyond the concern for roots as far as time and look at a name and say, well, what's in a name? Before Ohio Dominican College was called Ohio Dominican College, it was called St. Mary of the Springs. And when this name change occurred, there was a little friction that happened. okay, because people didn't want to see the name change. And there was even a minor student protest on campus over the name change. But Ohio Dominican College is what they decided at that time. Ohio reflects the location, Dominican reflects the Catholic tradition, and college indicates size. The other the other three names that were considered, there were a total of 4 names that were considered, but the other 3 were Moen College, Newman College, and Fenwick College, and of course Ohio Dominican College. But you might imagine that we might feel a little different if I was to, if I was to find out tomorrow that the administration and board of trustees had decided to change the name of Ohio Dominican College to Fenwick College. I might, I don't know, it might leave me a little unsettled initially. I began talking about my niece, Molly, and I'll close with a story about my niece, Molly, and how there's another illustration from her life, or my interaction with her life, I should say, that illustrates this concern for roots. A number of years ago, my younger sister, Betsy, was babysitting Molly and her brother and her sister, and she was having trouble getting them to bed because they didn't want to go to bed. So I was going out for a walk anyway, and she knew this, so she called me up and said, "Why don't you come over and help me get them to bed?" Because it was getting late. And I said, "Okay, I'll be there." And when I got there, Molly told me, she was only about 5 at the time, she said, "You can't tell me what to do because we're not related." And I said, "Well, yeah, we're related." I said, "I'm your uncle." All right. And she goes, "No, your last name is Schnell. My last name is Farrell. So you can't tell me what to do." All right, so I was kind of impressed with her thinking there, but of course it was bedtime, so I emphasized that the point is not whether we're related or not. The point is that I'm bigger than she is. And as she kind of marched off in a huff, I thought she had an interesting comment that shows the myth to philosophy, or the move from mythical reasoning to legal reasoning. She turned to me on her heel and she said that if this was to go to the people's court, that the Judge Wapner would find in her favor. Which again, you remember the move from myth to philosophy. We see this from time to time. But I begin with Molly and I close with Molly.